Hey people, I'm just gonna go through my build here. Uh, we're putting a 12 valve Cummins into a 2000 old body style Chev pickup. So I thought I'd show you kind of what we're doing and the challenges we've had to face and how we've solved them. So some of them might be, there's 100 ways to do every custom job like this. So here's just some of the things we've done and how we've sorted it and how we fixed it. So here we go. So to start with, this is the industrial engine. So one of the first things we had to do was change out the oil pan for the truck oil pan and flip it around, and we had to make a custom sump tube pickup for it to make it all fit. And the other change we had to make was the dipstick used to come out right there on the industrial engine. So we had to pull that out and put it in the back because now our sump pickup's at the back. As you can see here, we've got some custom motor mounts that I actually made by printing them with the 3D printer. We made a bunch of prototypes with them. And then we kind of had to test fit 4 or 5 or 6 or a dozen times to get the design perfect. And then we got them cut out of the plasma table and welded them together. So that solved that problem. So the next thing, because this is a Chev, we kept the Chevy AC compressor, and I ended up making a custom mount for it to sit where the idler pulley normally sits. And we're also using an alternator out of the next generation Chev, the new body style, only because it had the stator wire that I can use for my tack output. So that's what we kind of did at the front here. I'm using the stock belt, but I've cut 2 ribs off of it for now because the Chev alternator and the Chev compressor only have the, 5 ribs, and the Dodge had the 7 ribs. So in the future we might try and get the proper belt, but for now this is working. Okay, so the next change we made here is this Chevy has the hydrostatic brake booster. So we ended up using not the original power steering pump because that got lost somewhere. But this is the power steering pump off of a 2000 Chev, so the next gen again. And we just made a couple brackets to modify to fit it in there and to use the belt because the industrial engine had the power steering pump up here, and that's way too high for our hood. So we basically moved it down here, and I made a custom little spacer to pull the adapter out, and we're using just its own belt for the power steering and power brakes. Another thing we did is just modified the oil filler tube because it was way too high and up here, and that's an industrial engine thing as well. So another thing to note is the industrial engine actually had a big massive front mount right there. So before we even made the side motor mounts, we used that. And I just made a big brace across here, and we used the industrial mounts and little rubber pucks, and we kind of bolted it in there. Those are nylon pucks and just rubber mounts from a 5-ton or whatever. So this engine actually came out of a Ford 5-ton truck. And it came with an Allison transmission, but we ended up deciding not to use that because it doesn't have park and a few other issues we were dealing with. And on that note, so we decided to go with an NV 4500 transmission out of a Dodge. So we've got that stuffed in there, and a Dodge transfer case. We actually bought a whole manual kit somebody had put together, so it came with, you know, a steering column and the transmission and transfer case and a couple drive shafts and all the goodies associated, the clutch and the pedal and the slave. But that wouldn't fit in our pickup because this was actually an automatic to start with. So we ended up using the Dodge clutch slave cylinder, and we got a clutch pedal assembly from a Chev and put it in, and we kind of modified so that they both work together. And it took a bit of work to get the clutch pedal switch to to plug and play nicely. So you can see we've got the Chev clutch pedal switch, and we had to make the arm a little bit longer. I don't know if you can see it up there. Maybe you can. We ended up having to make the arm a little longer, and I made an adjuster on it so that we can play with the adjustment and get that clutch switch to actually work like it's supposed to. Okay, moving on. So moving underneath, it all pretty much fit under here. I had to modify the just the mount on the transmission cross member. I just had to hog the holes out a little bit, slot them, and we're using the Chevy transmission cross member. And I don't remember if that's the Chevy or the Dodge mount, but either way, we made it all work together. And it's all mated there for now. Underneath here, we're using our manual transfer case selector to actuate the transfer case. I'm still trying to work out a solution for the transfer case selector switch. I might just end up putting a switch up in the cab to actuate the computer. But that's a future problem for now. Another problem we're encountering is the speed sensor on the Dodge transfer case. This is a NP241 transfer case. So this isn't a 2-wire analog speed sensor they've got on here. It's a 3-wire. So I've actually got a little module coming. I'm hoping I can convert that signal to make my speedometer work. And it also does a tach, so because the tach signal coming off that GM alternator is a little too high. So those two signals I'm going to have to modify a little bit to work with my Chev gauges. Then I've got this signal interface unit here for my tach and my speed sensor. So the Dodge transfer case has a weird gear-driven speed sensor that sends a signal out that the Chev didn't like. So I tapped it into this little unit. So I tapped it into this unit here, and it gives me makes my speedo work. And the same with the tach signal. I'm using the Chevy alternator, and the 1 wire coming off of it goes into this unit, and I can divide the signal and set it up so my tach reads properly. On what we've done back here is, so this is the Dodge front half of the Dodge drive shaft. And we just made a bit of a bracket here because it sat a little bit further back, the steady bearing sat a little bit further back from the factory cross member, so we just made a brace to move it back. And then what we did is I went to a local powertrain shop and I basically brought him the ass end of this shaft, and I got him to make me a new one with the proper joints and the proper length to run into my Chev rear end. Again, this is a dually 1-ton. And he made me a custom front drive shaft too, with the proper connectors and ends. That was a little bit longer, I think, a few inches. Once we had everything in and lined up. Moving on to the fuel tank. We are using the stock Chevy fuel tank. So all I did was opened it up, cleaned it out, disconnected the fuel pump, and filled it with diesel. And then we had to change the filler neck from a diesel because the hole size is a little bit bigger. Turns out the metal part of the diesel nozzle is a little bit shorter. So there's the gas one there and the hose for it, and the metal one is a few inches shorter. So we had to just get a longer hose and change that out. That was no big deal. But we're using the stock fuel tank, stock fuel lines. In the wiring, I've omitted the fuel pump relay just so it doesn't get turned on because the engine has a mechanical fuel pump on it. Okay, moving on inside the cab. We haven't done much in here. We added a few aftermarket gauges. We've got a pyrometer, a trans temp, and a boost gauge, of course. And the only other thing we've done is I made custom brackets to fit a double din deck in the slot. And then we just cut a hole in the floor and put the shifter in with a little aftermarket boot there that we found. Not quite finished up in here yet. Okay, moving back to the front, this engine didn't have any sort of throttle linkage on it, or it did, but it came in a bucket with a bunch of random hacked together parts. So I ended up, I couldn't use the factory Dodge one off a 24 valve because we don't have the inserts that it normally bolts into. There's little inserts that go in there. And I figured the amount of work it's going to be, I might as well just make my own. So we basically made a custom throttle assembly here because I wanted to use the factory Chev cruise control as well. So that's what we've done here. There's a closer look at the motor mount if you want to see it. So this uses the factory Chevy location, but we modified the frame end of it a little bit to fit to clear the oil pan, and we flipped the motor mounts around actually. Instead of being this is normally on the bottom side, we flipped them around this way and moved them up a bit. So it's all kind of working, and we're going to stick with it. Okay, moving on to the front clip. We are using radiator and intercooler from a Dodge pickup, and somehow I managed to fit it in the front rad support. It took quite a bit of modification. As you can see, we cut out a bunch of that. To get the intercooler in, I had to make a custom front mount, which kind of holds it in place. Oh, we can't see the bottom. No, the bumper's on. Anyways, the bottom of the intercooler, I made a couple plates to hold the little rubber pucks that it mounts into. And then we just kind of stuffed it in here. So as you can see, we had to shave the headlight buckets a little bit. And this headlight bucket had to get shaved. And we actually had to modify this intercooler because it had a big hump right here. So we just cut this out and welded it back up for funsies. And then on the inside, I managed to sandwich the Chevy AC condenser in there. Just barely. Again, just a bit of welding and fabricating, and we stuffed it in. And we're using the Dodge Rad, right? Yeah. So we're using the Dodge Rad, and we had to cut a little bit out of there and drill a couple holes down there for the rubber mounts. But other than that, it pretty much fit in, and it sits just low enough to clear the hood. I'll show that after we get it put back together. Moving on to the cooling system. So these are just elbows that we found that were the right size, and this is a piece of exhaust pipe that we welded some bungs onto to give us our coolant bypass, our thermostat bypass. And we've got our sensor in there to turn on our electric fans. And the stock coolant temp sensor location, we put a Chevy one in to run our coolant temp gauge on our dash. So that's a Chevy coolant temp sensor, the one wire one, because that's the one the gauges use. And again, this one up here just turns on our electric fans because we omitted the clutch fan. So the only thing custom up here is a couple rad hoses. I don't know if the Dodge has the same coolant outlet in the same spot, so that's going to be a custom setup for anybody really moving forward. Moving on to the lower rad. Can I see it from underneath? Anyways, the industrial one came straight out and dumped straight down 90 degrees, and it was right into the frame rail. So we just kind of cut that apart and welded it straight. We got rid of the elbow, and then we just found a rad hose that was a full 90 degrees, and it lines up perfectly with the lower rad hose on the rad. Okay, moving on to the oil pressure gauge. We just used a Chevy oil pressure sensor and the stock Chevy wiring. We didn't need that one because that's a fuel pump shutoff, a low oil pressure fuel pump shutoff. So yeah, that's the Chevy gauge, and we just plugged it into whatever port we had. So you can see the industrial engine, the manifold dumps a different spot. It's a little further back from what I understand, which actually worked perfect because the exhaust that came with the engine went straight 90 down and just kicked out. So all we had to do here is, this is actually a cold air intake from, again, a 2000 Chev newer body style that we bought on eBay. And well, we had to cut a bracket off of it, and I think we cut a little bit off of one end just to kind of make it fit in the slot. We might still end up making a little cold air box around it one day, but that's what we've done there. You can see the AC stuff kind of all fits in there in close to the factory location. What else did we do up here? Right, the intercooler piping. So we ended up just clocking the turbo a little lower, and that's the stock intercooler outlet. And then we just we had a bunch of pipe from the engine, and we had a bunch of pipe from the Dodge swap from the intercooler that we got, and I don't even know where half the other stuff came from. We just put a bunch of things together with elbows and silicone couplers we've bought on eBay or Amazon, and we used bits and pieces, and I bought a little bead roller so I could make the bead. And somehow we managed to get the intercooler to line up and do the things it's supposed to do. So far, we haven't been able to get it outside to actually check if it's making boost yet. But in all theory, everything there should work fine. All right, another thing to note about the front clip is with the Dodge intercooler in there, you are not going to fit the factory markers and blinkers. So we actually bought these guys on Amazon, and they're super slim, and they just barely fit in there and clear everything behind, because otherwise it wasn't happening without cutting a whole bunch of extra out of the intercooler, and we weren't about to do that, especially on this side. We would have had to take most of this out. So these little aftermarket guys fit real nice there. They're super bright and they look sharp, so we're going with it. As for the bumper, what a nightmare. To make this bumper fit, and this little valance here, valance? So a plastic piece. My guy had to spend, I'm sure, several hours modifying the bumper to fit up against the intercooler and all that stuff. I should note too that we've got a 4-inch body lift, because we were told prior to starting this project that you needed 4 inches to clear the firewall, which I feel we could have made it without the 4-inch body lift. Well, maybe not. No, probably not down there where the transmission sits. I think the body lift is almost necessary, unless you pull the engine way forward, but then there's no room for a rad. So that's what we ended up doing. We've got the engine sitting back where we can still access the transmission bell housing bolts if we have to, which I'm sure somebody will have to someday. Hopefully it's not me. Right, so onto the wiring. I've completely rebuilt this wire harness. I must say though, if we didn't have AC or ABS or cruise control, this wiring job would have been a heck of a lot easier. But we have them, and that's what the client wanted, so that's what we're doing. So I basically rebuilt this harness from scratch. I pulled a bunch of wires out of the ECU because we don't need half of them. I just kept, where's the ECM? Hiding here. There it is. This is going to sit in its factory location. I've eliminated most of the wires. I'm keeping the only ones related to the AC and the 4x4 transfer case, because this GM has a electrically controlled front axle for now. So I've kept some of the electronics, and I've kept the electronics related to the cruise control modules up here. And we've kept the ABS just because it's there, and it's staying. So I've reworked this whole harness, and we haven't really road tested it yet, but in theory, all the connections are made, and that should work, I hope. We also got this cute little relay and fuse box, also on Amazon. That allowed me to add a pile of circuits. So I needed a circuit for the clutch to turn off the cruise control when you push the clutch in, fan trigger for the electric fans, and then the pull and the hold for the fuel shutoff solenoid. And I've given myself a nice fat ignition accessory lead in the cab. So that's what we've done there. And I think I reused the old fuel pump relay for something else, I'm sure, from what I remember. either way, I had to make a whole new harness, and I've made a whole new schematic for this truck just to make the body control work with all the other stuff, because we eliminated most of the engine control stuff. So the radiator, this is the Dodge radiator. We bought 2 nice slim electric fans. Again, wonderful Amazon, because that's pretty much all the clearance we had. Like our pulleys are sitting fractions of an inch from these fan housings. And we made just custom little plates with studs welded on them to attach these, because I don't like the tie wraps it comes with. That's dumb. So this is the Dodge Rad, and it fits. And the only thing we've done to the grill is a nice little billet aluminum insert. And then we've upgraded these lights as well, because we did the headlights and we did the headlights and we did the things, and we got blacked out or smoked out clearance lights and the light bar, of course. So it's all going to look pretty sharp once it's all put back together. Okay, just an update for you people. It's a few days later now. We've got most of the truck put back together. Box is on, lifted. Coming up front here now, you can see just how much clearance we've got for our electric fans. Can you see that? So our power steering accessory belt is sitting just slightly above that. We're pretty close right there, but it should all work. Here's the other side here, my tensioner. Other than that, we've got our aftermarket fuse and relay panel. There's the factory one there, factory computer. And anyways, that's pretty much it for the build. We haven't really taken it on the road yet, so we'll see what kind of things arise when that happens.